The air in the courtroom felt heavier than stone, pressing down on everyone inside. The wooden doors groaned open, and in walked Diddy. But gone was the swagger of a music tycoon. His steps dragged. His frame looked smaller, his shoulders bent beneath an invisible weight. Cameras fired off like a storm, shutters snapping like gunfire echoing through silence. He didn't glance at the reporters, nor at the prosecution's table. His eyes never lifted from the floor, as if each step dragged him deeper toward a fate he couldn't escape. When he reached the defense table, Diddy lowered himself into the chair, his hands locking together, trembling despite his grip. The judge hadn't even acknowledged him yet, her face buried in documents, her expression unreadable stone. The only sounds were the shuffle of papers and murmurs from the gallery until the bailiff's voice sliced through the air. "All rise." The entire room obeyed. Diddy pushed himself up too, not with power, but with duty. Before we go further into this gripping moment, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss stories like this. Now let's continue. The judge finally raised a gaze, surveying the room like she owned every breath inside it, and then her eyes landed on Diddy. No pity, no warmth, just a stare sharp enough to cut through glass. "You may be seated," she said, and the room shifted with a scrape of chairs against the floor. Diddy sat again, shallow breaths escaping as he glanced toward the gallery, where behind a sea of strangers and flashing pens, he knew his family was somewhere watching. His lawyer leaned in close, whispering words meant to ground him, but they barely registered. His mind was spinning with the months that led here, motions denied, offers rejected, endless nights where hope felt like a stranger. Every beat of his heart thundered like a clock counting down. This wasn't just another day in court. This was a final wall standing between him, and a future he feared more than anything. And deep inside, he knew this judge wasn't here to be swayed by tears or theatrics. She was here for judgment. With a slight nod, she signaled the proceedings to begin. Diddy's lawyer stood, buttoning his jacket with ritual precision, and stepped forward. His voice was steady, but urgency flowed through each syllable, commanding the silence. "Your Honor, today isn't about celebrity, headlines, or gossip. This is about a man's life. A man who has stumbled, yes, but who stands here asking for a chance to set things right." He began weaving Diddy's story, not the scandals splashed across screens, but the years of music that shaped culture, the companies that created opportunity, the scholarships and charities funded quietly without cameras chasing recognition. The picture was of a man, imperfect yet redeemable, someone who had given more than he had ever taken. But behind those words lived desperation. Every so often, the attorney's eyes flicked toward Diddy, urging him to keep his composure. Diddy's hands clamped the edge of the table, knuckles bone white, his eyes locked somewhere between the judge and the ground. He heard every word, but each sentence felt like a rope stretched thinner, threatening to snap. The gallery remained hushed, an audience watching a play where the ending wasn't yet written. Faces in the crowd told different stories. Some reflected pity, some cold judgment, while others scribbled furiously into notebooks, already shaping tomorrow's headlines. Across the aisle, the prosecutor sat still, arms folded, her face a blank mask of control. But her pen tapped lightly on the desk, a rhythm too calculated to ignore. She was patient, letting the defense build their plea, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The judge, however, remained unmoved, jotting notes without revealing the slightest shift in expression. That silence was suffocating, like a wall no one could break through. Diddy's lawyer felt it too. Every word he had spoken carried weight. But now it was over, and the air hung thick with tension. He took a breath, cast one last glance at his client, and sank into his chair. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, with deliberate control, the prosecutor rose. Her eyes fixed first on the judge, then flicked toward Diddy, sharp and unflinching. In that single glance, it was clear the real fight was about to start. She stood with slow, calculated precision, every motion designed to dominate the room before a single word left her mouth. Straightening her jacket, she stepped into the center of the courtroom, owning the space. When her voice finally rang out, it was steady, crisp, and edged with steel. "Your Honor, the defense has painted a moving picture, but emotion cannot rewrite truth." She turned to the jury, eyes locking with each one like she was speaking only to them. This case isn't about fame, awards, or philanthropy. It's about actions, deliberate, harmful actions, choices that were made again and again with no accountability. Her words fell like blows, each one heavier than the last. A timeline was laid out, date by date, moment by moment, each fact cold and precise. Evidence flickered onto the screen beside her, bank statements, contracts, grainy security stills. Each piece stripped Diddy of the image he had built, reducing him to nothing but shadows of proof. At first, he kept his eyes low, but as the weight of evidence grew, he lifted his head, jaw tightening. His lawyer's hand pressed lightly on his arm, reminding him to hold steady, to stay silent, even as the room watched with burning intensity. The gallery leaned in, their faces telling the story before words could. Some looked shocked, others disgusted, while reporters scribbled furiously, their pens chasing the headlines this day would create. Then the prosecutor stepped closer to the jury box, her voice dropping low, pulling every ear forward. The defense speaks of redemption, but redemption without accountability is a lie. This trial isn't about denying his future, it's about demanding justice for his past. With that, she returned to her seat, her calm movements louder than applause. For the first time, Diddy shifted, unease breaking through his mask. His attorney rose quickly, every muscle tight as though fighting the damage already done. He took the floor, voice calm yet sharpened with urgency. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, I will not pretend the evidence is meaningless, but evidence without its story is like a book with missing chapters. He lifted a folder from the table, holding it high. You've been shown snapshots designed to paint my client as nothing more than a villain. What you haven't seen is the full picture. He spread out photographs, images of charity drives, mentoring sessions, food deliveries, moments where Diddy stood not as a celebrity, but as a man trying to give back. This, he said, voice softening as he turned to the jury, is not the face of someone without conscience. This is a flawed man, yes, but a man who has poured years into uplifting others. The question isn't whether he is perfect, it's whether we believe a man can be greater than his worst mistakes. Diddy straightened, eyes locked on his lawyer with something close to hope. The gallery remained divided, some unmoved, others visibly wrestling with doubt. A murmur rippled from back, silenced instantly by the bailiff's stern glare. Then, with quiet conviction, the lawyer turned to the bench. Your Honor, my client requests to speak, not through me, not through counsel, but directly to you. He wants you to hear from a man whose fate you will decide. The judge's expression shifted, ever so slightly, her narrowed eyes revealing the weight of the moment. She leaned back, silent, considering the request. The air thickened again, every heartbeat in the room waiting for her word. For a moment, the courtroom froze, the air thick with unspoken tension. Everyone knew this was a razor's edge. If Diddy spoke, it could either save him or shatter every chance he had left. The judge gave the smallest nod, and his lawyer stepped aside, his face a mask betraying nothing. The scrape of Diddy's chair against the floor echoed louder than any gavel. He rose, buttoned his jacket, and began his walk to the center. Each step was weighted with years of triumphs, scandals, and regrets. By the time he stopped, all eyes were locked on him. He stood alone, swallowed by silence, the judge's gaze heavy upon him. For a long moment, no words came. His chest rose slowly as if he were inhaling courage itself. Finally, his voice broke through, low, steady, and laced with raw emotion. Your Honor, I know this isn't the place for theatrics. I can't erase the past, but I need you to see me beyond the headlines and accusations. His eyes darted briefly toward the jury, then back to the bench. I've spent my life climbing, building something from nothing. And yes, I made mistakes along the way. Mistakes that hurt people, even when I never meant them to. His voice faltered, but he steadied himself, hands clasped tightly in front of him. Every day, I've carried those choices. Not just today, not just here in this courtroom, but in every moment I've had to face the man staring back at me in the mirror. He swallowed hard, glancing down before lifting his head again. I've raised children who look to me. I've tried to guide others so they wouldn't repeat my failures. I've invested in communities because I remember what it's like to grow up with nothing. I'm not asking you to erase my past. I'm asking you to believe I still deserve a future. From the gallery, a faint shuffle broke the stillness. Someone leaning forward, desperate not to miss a word. Diddy's eyes found them for just an instant, softening before he turned back to the judge. His tone dropped, quieter now, but heavy with urgency. If you take my freedom, you're not just taking it from me. You're taking it from every person who depends on me. I can't promise perfection, but I promise, if you give me another chance, I won't waste it. When the words ended, silence reclaimed the room. No whispers, no applause, just the raw weight of his confession hanging in the air. The judge's face remained unreadable, her pen motionless on the desk as she leaned back in her chair. Diddy felt as though he was standing on a cliff, waiting to learn if the next step would be his salvation or his ruin. The silence dragged on, stretching tighter and tighter, until even the faint creak of a chair in the back made heads turn. Her fingers tapped lightly against the bench, not impatient, but deliberate, adding gravity to the moment. And then her voice cut through. "Mr. Combs, you've spoken of mistakes, of family, of your good deeds. But tell me, what makes a day any different from every other time you stood asking for leniency?" The question cut deeper than any accusation. Diddy's lips parted, but the answer didn't come right away. He stared at his clasped hands, then drew a slow, steady breath. Lifting his gaze to meet Hayes, his voice was firm, stripped of performance. "Because, Your Honor, this time I got nothing left to hide behind. No music, no fame, no headlines to spin. Just me, and the truth. And the truth is, I can't go back to who I was. If I do, I won't survive it." The judge's face didn't shift, but the stillness thickened around her words. The prosecutor stirred in her seat, poised like a predator ready to strike. Diddy's lawyer sat frozen, eyes fixed on the judge, silently pleading for her to believe. The room felt suspended, the verdict hovering like a storm about to break. Finally, after a pause that dragged like eternity, the judge slowly turned her gaze toward the prosecution's table. "Your response," the judge said flatly, her tone carrying the weight of inevitability. The prosecutor rose, her steps measured, her presence controlled as she moved to the center of the courtroom. Her voice was cold, precise, like a scalpel. "Your Honor, heartfelt words don't erase patterns. Promises have been made before, broken before. Regret cannot outweigh accountability." She shifted her stance, locking eyes with Diddy. "This court is not a stage, Mr. Combs. Truth is measured here, and truth does not bend to tears." The words cut sharp, leaving the room colder than before. Diddy's shoulders slumped, just slightly, as though a piece of hope had slipped away. The gallery stayed silent, but the air was different now, thick with finality. The judge's gaze flickered between both tables, her hands lowering toward the papers stacked before her. Everyone in the room felt it. The next phase was coming, and with it, the decision that would change everything. Diddy's breath slowed, heavier, as though the air itself had grown heavier in his lungs. He searched the gallery with his eyes, desperate for an anchor, but saw only cold stares and relentless cameras. The walls seemed depressing, judgment closing around him. His lawyer leaned close, whispering words meant to keep him calm, but it was already too late. The cracks were showing. His lips tightened, shoulders heaved with each strained breath, and his eyes shimmered with unshed tears he could no longer hide. The judge noticed, but her expression never shifted, carved from stone. The prosecutor stood watching, her silence smug in its own way, the unspoken message clear. "This is exactly where I wanted you." Diddy's hands fidgeted endlessly, clasping, unclasping, rubbing until finally his head sank into his palms. The gallery erupted in murmurs, a ripple of disbelief, silenced quickly by the bailiff's sharp command. But the damage was done. Sean Diddy Combs, the mogul, the empire builder, the man who once commanded rooms, was unraveling in front of them all. He lifted his head again, trying to recover, but his eyes were red, his jaw trembling. His voice cracked, raw and broken. "Your Honor, please, I've told you the truth. I'm begging you, just one chance to make this right." The judge didn't move at first. Instead, she leaned forward, elbows pressing against the bench, her gaze predatory in its focus. The silence dragged, painful, every heartbeat in the room pounding like a drum. And in that stillness, everyone understood. This wasn't about arguments anymore. This was about whether the judge believed there was any path forward for him at all. Her face gave no mercy. What came next would decide everything. Her eyes locked onto him, steady, unflinching. For the first time all morning, she leaned in, her voice calm but cutting with finality. "Mr. Combs, I've heard your words. I weigh the evidence, the arguments, and the history that sits behind this case. But understand this, sympathy is not justice." The gallery shifted forward instinctively, sensing the verdict's shadow. Diddy froze, his breath caught halfway. His lawyer braced, but said nothing. "You asked for another chance," she continued, her tone like iron. "But the record shows chances are being granted and squandered. You speak of change, but change is not spoken. Change is proven. And this court is not convinced your actions reflect your words." The statement hit like a hammer. Diddy's shoulders dropped, his eyes falling to the table. His lawyer's jaw clenched, but he stayed still. Then the final words came, sharp and absolute. "I will not alter the sentence. The ruling stands." The hallway stretched before him like a tunnel, lined with deputies and flashing bulbs, each step echoing with the finality of a man walking deeper into his own sentence. Outside, the crowd pressed against barricades, voices rising in a chaotic mixture of outrage, curiosity, and triumph. Some shouted his name as if demanding answers. Others hurled words meant to wound, to strip away whatever fragments of dignity he had left. The cameras never stopped. They followed every flinch, every blink, every breath, documenting the fall of a man who had once seemed untouchable. Diddy didn't look at them. He couldn't. His gaze stayed fixed ahead, locked on a point no one else could see. Reporters shouted. Microphones thrust forward like weapons, but he passed them as if they weren't there at all. His lawyer tried to shield him, murmuring promises of appeals, of strategies, of the fight not being over. But Diddy knew better. The fight had already ended back in that courtroom. As the cold air hit him outside the courthouse, he stopped for just a moment on the steps. The crowd surged forward, the noise rising like a wave threatening to crash down on him. But in that second, there was only silence in his mind. Silence, and the echo of the judge's words. Sympathy is not justice. They looped endlessly, burning into him, a sentence heavier than any prison walls could hold. With one last breath, he descended the steps. Each footfall was swallowed by the chaos, yet somehow they sounded louder than the shouts, louder than the cameras, louder than everything else. By the time the black car door opened and he slid inside, he was already somewhere else. Not free, not imprisoned, but trapped in a space where reputation and reality had finally collided. And as the door slammed shut, the world outside kept roaring, while inside the car there was only the hollow silence of a man who knew he would never outrun this day.